On and off. We're on. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Health, Housing and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee. Today we're in the Thornton room. So that's the way out, I think. And so if members appraise themselves of that and any visitors, we'll go through the agenda and I will start by doing the apologies. We've apologies from Councillor Runciman, with Councillor Waller substituting, and apologies from Councillor Kelly with Councillor Whitcroft substituting. So welcome. We will move to the first item on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. So I will ask if any members have got a declaration. No. Okay, thank you. We'll move on. And there are two sets of minutes to sign and, well, to approve and sign. And I'm happy to take any matters arising should members wish. Could I ask for members to give approval for the 13th of December and if there's any points arising?
I had some thoughts, Chair.
That's okay.
Yeah, the December meeting, we discussed oral health.
Yeah.
And in that context, sorry, oh, it didn't come up. Okay, sorry. We discussed oral health, and in that context, we had two members of the dentist profession there, as well as members from the integrated care board and the NHS. It's not noted in here that we did discuss at one point the opportunities that are presented by the integrated care system for setting up new forms of primary care centre that would incorporate primary care and dentistry and pharmacy all in the one building. And the dentist representatives were very clear that they supported such a thing and that they recognised that would have a value going forwards in smaller communities. So I would like that to be in the record, Chair, if it's possible in one form or another. I've written a form of words, if that's useful for you. Yeah. So I'll read it out. The committee discussed the opportunities presented by the integrated care system reforms to transform healthcare in smaller communities around York. The visitors declared a willingness to participate in the creation of new primary care centres that might incorporate dental services, pharmacies and doctors on the one site as a way of better managing resources and ensuring residents had access to health services without having to use cars or limited public transport.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Any members from that meeting, are you happy with those words that Councillor Vassy? Sorry, microphone on. I'm happy with that, and got an indication from members that they're also happy with the set of words to reflect those conversations at the December meeting. We'll add them in and bring them back for signing formally at our next meeting. Okay. Any other matters from the December minutes? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it's like the most tenuous link ever. So because in the December minutes, it refers to the October and November minutes, it references the Salvation Army contract. And I know everyone at this table knows, but I think it's worth for this committee's minutes updating on the fact that we still haven't had that coming through to ANG. So we referred it before these two sets of minutes on a previous meeting to that. It's taken its time. So just, I think it's worth mentioning at this committee, even though everybody's already aware out of the members here.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. So that's as a matter arising, essentially. Yeah. Point noted. Okay, we'll park the December minutes. We'll move to the next set. What month was that in our life? January the 30th. So those start at page 11. Can I have approval that those are a correct set of minutes?
I had one note again, Chair.
Of course, Councillor Vassy.
On performance indicators and monitoring, we discussed the fact that so many of the performance indicators have not applicable next to the benchmarks, and raised that that was a problem going forward, because if you can't compare anything with anything, how are you going to improve anything? And officers indicated that they would look at how the benchmarks and performance indicators might be presented differently, so that there would be ways of having a better grip on direction of travel. I don't know if members recall that.
I remember that, yeah. And so,
I think
do you have a
it'd be
set
nice.
of words? Or do
I
you have to
haven't-
work on a set? We can work on a set of
Yeah.
words to reflect that in those minutes. And it looks like, James, my signature pen will go back in its box. We'll do more minutes next time. Okay, if members are happy with that. So we'll, in principle, approve them, get a little set of wording to reflect the performance benchmarking, direction of travel, conversations we had, and we'll have a bumper set of minutes to sign next month. It's best to do it right, Councillor Vassy. I'm happy with that. Everybody else happy with that approach? Yep. Okay. Public participation. James, nobody's registered to speak? No. If you are watching and you want to join us, you are more than welcome next time. Okay, and at this point, I'll also mention to members and officers that this meeting is being webcast and it is a public meeting, and you will be able to find it online. Okay, item number 4. Housing and asset management. Housing, asset management and repairs update. We've got Michael Jones and Tracy Carter to present to us. Shall I hand over so you could introduce the report?
Good evening. Just about. So yeah, this is a update relating to council housing stock. So our repairs and asset management service. There's a lot to go at. It's a fairly substantial report with some fairly substantial documents sitting alongside it. So I don't plan to say too much, because I think most benefit would be to give lots of space for you to ask questions. But the information contained in the pack is the asset management plan. So that is a plan that's already been approved by executive. But I'm aware that probably there's a fair number of members here who haven't seen it before. I think it could be really useful for informing discussions today and at future agendas about investment plans, around priorities, around asset management within council housing. And as with all documents, it needs to be a live document that reflects changing circumstances. So if anyone has any comment or feedback on that, then obviously we can take that into account in terms of how we use that asset management plan moving forward. The second major document is our repairs policy, which is a number of years out of date. We need to refresh it in terms of legislative changes, but also just in terms of make sure it's taking account of current needs and current priorities. Our intention is that we will engage with residents, our council house customers, on a refresh of that policy in the coming months. It'd be great to get any feedback that scrutiny members have on the tone, the contents, the effectiveness of that policy to inform that public engagement process. And then I've provided more detailed updates on 3 areas that I was guided towards by scrutiny, but also our areas of probably significant change in the last few months and since the asset management plan was written. So one is around damp and mould, which is obviously of growing importance, and that's reflected in a massive growth in the number of incidents reported through to us of people having damp and mould in their council homes. The second update is around a stock condition survey. So we're currently in the process of surveying hopefully all 7,500 council homes to gain a better understanding of the condition of those properties and to inform investment plans. And what I'm suggesting here is that once that stock condition survey is complete, that I'll bring it to a future agenda, and we can perhaps discuss it alongside the asset management plan to talk about future investment plans. And then the final item is disrepair. So that is where a resident considers that their house is in a state of disrepair, excuse me, and they decide to take legal action against the council. And that's presented more in a kind of growing tendency for a number of legal practices to proactively contact council residents and to push them down this route, and what we can do to support our council residents to go through the appropriate process, because going through the legal process and a detrimental outcome from their point of view can be quite expensive. So those three items are presented around, this is our current approach, and any feedback members have around the effectiveness of that and how we best support our customers moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Tracy, do you want to add anything? Are you happy there?
No, I think that the extent of the scope of this particular scrutiny makes it quite difficult to dig in an immense amount of detail on these. But whenever you do talk about some of the kind of sub-elements of this strategy, you've got to just bear in mind that they are all being funded from the same pot. The HRA is a fixed pot funded by our tenants for the ongoing maintenance and improvement and increase in stock of all the households. So all of the priorities from new housing through the housing delivery programme through to reactive repairs, planned maintenance, retrofit, and everything to do with stock condition, it all comes out of that same pot. And at the moment, we are still recovering from the COVID impact upon rent collection that we had for those 2-3 years. And we are, maybe it's a subject of a different scrutiny that you might want to consider later in the year, but we will be kind of looking to kind of reprioritise our resources around how we achieve that. Because at the moment, that's having a detrimental impact on the functions of our housing management teams. So we don't want to go into that at the moment, but it's another issue which I know some members have got concerns about. All funded from the same pot, finite pot. So we strive towards excellence in everything, but this is a journey. When I took over, and I'm not claiming any glory for this, but when I took over the housing function, building services had not had any serious management attention for quite some time, and Michael has taken over this remit and has done an absolutely sterling job of refocusing the team and bringing some rigour and some metrics to the planning of maintenance activity, and to try and increase the performance for customers and the responsiveness of that service. I'm not saying we never get it wrong, we do, and we will continue to learn from those mistakes. But it is a service that it's on a upwards trajectory, an improvement journey, not there yet. So just there's a bit of context around the subject matter.
That's really welcome. Thank you for that, Tracy. Members, we've got the report, substantial report in front of us. Are there any, we'll do questions, comments for officers, and then following that, if there's any discussion amongst members or debate that we'd like to have around the recommendations, then we'll do that second. Has any members got any questions or comments? Councillor Vassie.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the first comments, I'll focus on communications, then I'll step back and maybe come in later for something else. You mentioned them already in your presentation. So we've got in this report a reference to the number of legal disrepair claims, and also reference to the number of contacts over damp and mould, and how there seems to be such a disjoint between the number of people reporting problems or feeling that they're aggrieved or that they have a case, and the number of people who have a case. My question really is about what we could do to communicate better because it plainly is occupying a lot of council officers' time. It's leading tenants to believe they may have cause for redress when they don't, which will be causing frustrations and anxieties and so on and so forth. So I'm just wondering what you think we could be doing better in terms of communication to reduce the number of people putting in legal disrepair claims because they might have misunderstood what disrepair is. And similarly, those who are approaching over damp and mold, misunderstanding what the issues might be and what redress might be available. What do you think we could be doing better to enable things to progress more smoothly and productively for everyone?
I'll start with just a brief outline of what we've done so far. So we've done 2 or 3 press releases in the last 12 months. We have a growing number of council residents who access information through Facebook. So we've been trying to more proactively update our Facebook account so that it encourages more people to use it and we can get that message across. We've put information on the council website. We made contact with trading standards around, is there any investigation that can take place around these people that are, in some cases, falsely promising or overly promising council house residents and giving them inaccurate or poor information about the correct process to go through. I know that the building services team are trying to do more outreach. So I'm aware that there's a roadshow taking place next week that lots of residents are invited to, and customers are encouraged to come along and to talk about repair issues. And we hope that perhaps some people will do that don't currently use the existing channels. I guess the main thing is, or one of the main things is, we continue to improve. So the more we improve, the better our responses to our customers, the less customers will go down that route. In terms of what else we can do beyond that, I'm stuck, but I would absolutely welcome any suggestions. But it's generally legal practices from outside of York who are knocking on doors or sending letters to customers, and they're not doing anything illegal by doing that. So our job is to try and make sure that at least when they are doing that, council residents are given the right information to make informed decisions.
And what's happening in the context of that one is that in response to the terrible situation that gave rise to AWAB's law and the consultation that's going through that, the whole issue of damp and mould was given a hyper boost of a very, very concerned media activity. That has resulted in misinformation as well as information. But it's also, we've got, you'll have heard the radio campaigns yourself. Are you a tenant? Have you got damp? Make a complaint, come to us. So it's quite hard to compete with that in terms of more accurate messaging. We wouldn't want to discourage anybody from reporting a situation where there was a significant breach either. But we want to do that through our own processes rather than it involving, no win, no fee lawyers that end up actually not being a no fee lawyer.
Do you want to come back and then I'll bring members in?
Just come back briefly,
Yeah,
Chair.
okay.
Yeah. So, well, what occurred to me reading the report was something that we've rehearsed in the past. Was, would there be a potential value in using or expanding, if you're already doing it, peer-to-peer communication? Because I've seen it time and time again that people are sometimes reluctant to listen to official bodies and official parties and professionals, but they might be more willing to listen to their peers, to fellow tenants, and might there be an opportunity, therefore, to work with tenants groups to help them to communicate to each other what works. And maybe you're doing that already, but that was what occurred to me.
I think that's a very good idea. So yeah, we'll discuss that with our resident scrutiny panel to see how we can roll that out. But yeah, I agree. Kind of community champions would be a really helpful extra tool. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, I have 3 members indicated on this. I'll bring them in order. So Councillor Steels-Walshaw.
It was just a follow on, and I think it's possibly been answered, but it was about, are there any specific communications for people? Because I've had a lot of residents say to me they are being contacted by these no win, no fee people. They're not advising them that they could ultimately end up with a big fee at the end of this. And they are proactively seeking people. I do wonder in the first place where they're getting these people's contact details from to proactively seek them, but they are proactively contacting a lot of residents and telling them basically that they've got a claim and they will get a payout for this. I just wondered if there was any specific thing we could do to target this, or if there is something being done.
We put an article in our resident newsletters to try and highlight that. So rather than trying to pretend it's not happening, we've highlighted the fact that they might be getting approached and tried to suggest an alternative route. Question is whether or not if that's coming from a position of distrust of us, they're not necessarily going to believe that message. So I think Councillor Bassey's suggestion about using peer-to-peer comms might have a bit more strength. I guess we can also use ward councillors to try and protect them against that particular jeopardy.
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Hello again. Yeah, I very much building on Councillor Steels-Warshaw's point there. As far as I can tell, this is nothing short of predatory behaviour by a lot of these firms that are clearly being completely cynical. I'm reading a case on page 7 where £10,000 or excess of £10,000 was cost for bringing in for a council tenant. I understand there's this. I absolutely second Councillor Bassey's point about peer-to-peer contact, potentially fostering some community WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups of that sort, which I know that a lot of people find very useful in their neighbourhoods. But is there a case for sort of naming and shaming some of these practices if they've actively undertaken things that we consider to be predatory behaviour in terms of encouraging someone to sue the council, them ending up with £10,000 of debt or more? I think there is a case for us being able to go out there, whether it's us as ward councillors, whether it's the council itself, but saying this practice did this. Could that be something that we do?
I probably need to go and speak to the monitoring officer about that. I think probably the direction of travel on that is correctly to go through our colleagues in public protection. Where there are sharp practices going on, then and there is a legal case against it, they should be the ones pursuing that rather than us potentially getting ourselves into legal hot water.
Councillor Rose and then Councillor Waller.
Thanks. Yeah, another follow-on question from that, and agreeing with all those points, I think that we absolutely do need to be, giving the information around what is true, also giving the information around what to watch out for if people approach you. It's understandable that if I were a resident and I thought I had a case and somebody said to me, I have a case and it's only the council saying I don't, well, I'm not going to believe the people that I'm potentially going to be taking legal action against. So that peer-to-peer or other sources of information, and obviously we've got other partners as well, I think is key. I think trying to get into those local groups, if they're WhatsApp or Nextdoor or Facebook, can be more difficult, but there's also some housing areas where there isn't really a strong tenancy organisation, and I was wondering if there's more that we can do collectively as a council and as ward councillors to understand where there isn't a peer network, and more we can do to perhaps establish one and support that information, and that obviously can share information potentially more easily about which organisations have stung people and what they said that wasn't true specifically and all that sort of stuff. Got a second question, but I think it's unrelated enough. I'll leave it for later. But yeah, and anything, I guess, and more information that's clearer for us to find. I know I will be able to find the information we're talking about here, but I don't know initially where to look without searching for it. So having a very clear if you're a councillor or a local officer or a local resident, here's how you easily find exactly all the information related to this would be quite useful as well.
I think that sounds like quite a good idea to be able to use those channels. And if we pull together a guide to, you know, what's going on, what to watch out for, where what erroneous information is being and maybe some case studies as well. So if we bring out the, you know, the example of someone who really did get into a lot of trouble, personal financial trouble from that, then I think that speaks louder than Michael and I kind of shouting from the rooftops, I'm sure.
I think
So if we can take an action to pull together a kind of a newsletter type equivalent for ward councillors, which you can then use in whichever way.
I think it's definitely a good idea, because as well as it just being a general problem that any one of us would hate to have, the most vulnerable being targeted and the people with the worst financial challenges are being riddled with quite significant financial problems on top of it. So, you know, it's something that we as councillors definitely will all care about, and residents who don't know this is an issue today probably would also care about it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from this point, I think what also needs to be looked at is improving confidence in the repair and modernisation service, because it's a sort of symptom of where a tenant hasn't had a response that they feel listened to. I know of a number of cases where they've pursued this, but there could have been a point at which there was that feeling that their case was being listened to and that they had an understanding of what stages would happen, so that they didn't feel that when the leaflet dropped through their letterbox that this was somehow a shortcut to getting the service that they ought to receive. So I think it does need to reinforce the existing repairs service. Dare I mention the phone number? Sometimes it does seem to be unobtainable to some residents because they start to come through to councillors. Delighted that Councillor Vassy has raised the profile of tenants associations. That's an important feature of that consultation process, and giving another voice to hear about. Don't listen to everything that these people are telling you in terms of the no win, no fee, and obviously maintaining the visible presence of estate managers on the estate to have that opportunity for regular conversations is a vital point. And I know I've raised that with you, Tracy, in terms of some of the areas in the patch. Cheers.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the biggest change that will happen in terms of raising confidence in the repair service is actually when we start to perform better. But it's a long, slow process back to a position of trust. And as I say, we've still got bits of the machine that are not working quite as well as we'd like. But let's really talk about some of the changes we've made to try and look into that.
Yeah, so yeah, just quickly. So I completely recognise what Councillor Law says. I think communication is one of our biggest weaknesses, and something that we are trying to improve. One of the things that we're doing, so following the most recent tenant satisfaction survey, we've picked out 100 customers who have raised issues that feel quite kind of consistent with some of the themes that come through, and we've asked for appropriate service managers to make phone calls to them. So we're proactively contacting 100 customers through that process and taking some of the learnings from that. So some of it will be about I guess attitude and thinking ahead around communication. Some of it might be needing to change processes and how we work, but that's, I guess, a relatively small thing that we're doing to try and improve that feedback loop with customers and to kind of embed some better ways of working that are more mindful of how our customers are feeling about our service, because as Tracy said, some of our statistics show improvements in our repair service, but the feedback from customers doesn't reflect that. So there's clearly something happening somewhere. There's a bit of an imbalance between perception and reality when you look at the stats. So yeah, we're digging through that a little bit at the moment.
Thank you. I'll go on damp and mould and I'll bring you in, Councillor Smalley, if that's okay. So just moving on from comms to actual dealing with damp and mould in properties. I've over the years been generally dissatisfied with some of the responses to severe cases of damp and mould that I've seen and dealt with as a case, where almost a stock response goes out to the tenant to say, open your windows and turn the heating on. And obviously I'm really concerned about the link between damp and mould and fuel poverty. And I guess looking for some reassurance that around the assessment, when it's reported, of how the council is making an assessment, whether it's structural or what level of readings of dampness are present, and how are we holding that information so that we're confident with the requirements with AWAB's law that we're looking into this robustly, and who is a secondary question to that, if you could answer the first one, but if you could give us some more detail about who is going to go and collect those, do that initial assessment. Is it council building services teams? Have we got an independent contractor? And are they, what are the terms of that arrangement? If it is an independent contractor, are they whipping round the stock as quick as possible and giving results? Some general feeling on that would be really helpful.
Michael can give you a much clearer view than I can about how we respond to it, who does the assessment, whatever. But I think just before we get into this conversation, there is a difference between whether damp is structural or environmental, and whether it is a serious health concern. You can have serious damp from not heating or ventilating your properties. You can't solve it as easily in a structural way. If you are not heating your home and not ventilating your home, you will have damp. And you know, it's a fact. And we've had the wettest winter on record, and I don't think that particular pattern is going to change anytime soon. We live in a temperate climate. We will have to deal with damp. So there is no easy answer to this that says whenever you get a serious case of damp, you can just roll in there and solve it with a repair. If the behaviours and the housing density are such that the level of moisture in the property creates damp, and there has to be an interrelationship with the tenant to be able to manage that. I've got a 100-year-old house, it's got damp, and there's things that I have to do to deal with that in a regular maintenance way that are quite difficult to deal with structurally, and that's my house. You know, that some of our stock is more likely to have those issues, but we have had instances of complaints from tenants where the stock is relatively modern. There isn't a structural damp issue. There's not damp coming in, but there's no heating on, and all of the vents have been blocked up, and they are airing their laundry in the house. You will have damp. You will therefore get mold. So it's just to kind of state that as the point of starting off, and then Michael will come and tell you all the nice things that we're doing about it, rather than the kind of the uncomfortable realities of living in a damp climate.
Yeah, so we'll talk about some of the positives, but I'll also start with an admission of failing. So I think we absolutely hold our hands up that we haven't responded quickly enough to some structural damp issues. So we have a backlog of properties that require structural damp works for reasons that I won't go into here, but that list and that backlog was allowed to grow. We are now working our way through it. We have procured contractors dealing with it. We have a greater level of understanding and rigour around that work. And it isn't acceptable that if you have a structural damp issue, that you go on a list and wait a couple of years. So our intention is to get through that backlog so that as future structural damp issues arise, as they always will, that people are waiting much shorter periods of time. So absolutely admission of a need to do better there. In terms of the reports that come through today of damp and mould, then in the pack is our approach, our process for how we assess damp and mould complaints. I think previously damp and mould investigations were carried out by a greater number of people. There was a greater level of inconsistency with the advice and the support that residents got. We now have a dedicated surveyor who goes out and investigates the vast majority of these. So there's a greater consistency of approach and advice. I guess reiterating what Tracy said, I don't have exact numbers, but more than 90% of the reports of damp and mould that we get don't identify a structural issue. So this is absolutely not about blaming the people that live there, but we have properties where we have overcrowding because we don't have sufficient affordable housing stock. We have residents that can't afford to turn their heating on. So there's a whole package of work that involves advice, and we've got some on our website, but in-person advice is obviously better, around support in terms of things like fuel vouchers. There are opportunities to improve the ventilation of those properties, which we take where that's appropriate. And then those properties that have got structural damp issues, then, as I said, we have a commitment that we will get to them more quickly than we have in the past. Arab's law will bring in legislative timescales for investigating them that will require us to respond within a certain timescale, and will also require us to take account of vulnerabilities. So we do that anyway. So when we prioritise the structural investment work, it takes account of the condition of the property, but also who's living there. But that will become a legislative requirement, and we'll have to respond more quickly to those properties that contain residents who are more vulnerable. It will create additional pressures on the service that we will look to respond to the best we can. But I guess going back to Tracy's original point about one pot, multiple priorities. So there's a balance on all these things, because Arab's law covers damp and mould, but it also covers 28 other health and safety considerations, and damp and mould is very high priority in the press, in conversations. Other things are just as significant to health and safety, and clearly we can't get blindsided by one particular item. So there's a massive piece of work around how we suitably prioritise and take account of vulnerabilities in a consistent, joined up, transparent way.
I really appreciate that reply. I'll bring a couple of members in. We'll come to Councillor Smalley after, as they've indicated on this brief section. But first, I just want to come back and say the surveyors that you're using, it sounds like you're doing that because you want more consistent data. Is that a contractor, and do we have a length of contract with that surveyor?
The initial visit is carried out by a member of building services, the surveyor. If we believe the issue is structural and is significant and would warrant expert external advice, we have a procured contractor who will go out, do a very thorough analysis, and will present a report identifying all of the works that they would recommend. So it's initially internal, and we have the capacity for external support as and when we need it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Wilson and Councillor Rose.
Thanks, Chair. And Michael, you've answered some of what I was questioning. So I know that a number of the damp and mold cases that have arisen are not structural. I was just wondering a little bit about how you support those residents to make those changes in a really positive way, because I can imagine that if you phoned up to complain about damp and mold and you're told that you just need to put your heating on and open your windows when you're struggling for money and things are difficult, that could sour relationships between housing officers rather than making it a proactive relationship that you're less likely to listen to the people knocking on your door suggesting that you sue us.
So the feedback that I've been getting from the surveyor who does the initial visit is that the advice that he's providing is being very welcome and being very warmly received. And I guess not everyone would understand what's caused a damp issue. And I think the advice is presented in a way which is compassionate and takes account of the fact that we have a cost of living crisis and the solution can't be open your windows and turn your heating on. So what other things can be done? So sometimes there's been an example, for example, of a resident who had a substantial fish tank and didn't have a lid on the fish tank. So that was creating moisture in the air in a way that they didn't consider. So sometimes the solution can be quite simple, but something that you perhaps wouldn't think of as a resident. And as I said, we do offer fuel vouchers, which isn't a long-term solution, but does provide some short-term respite during the colder months. But it's a massive challenge, and as long as the cost of living crisis remains, it's going to be a significant issue for years to come. And other than being mindful and compassionate when providing advice, there's no easy solution to that question.
There's another reason why retrofitting houses so that the temperature isn't so divergent from the outside is beneficial, not just from a financial perspective, but from a health perspective as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, sometimes I ramble a bit. This is one of those times because I've got a lot of thoughts and questions around it, and it was my partial question from before. It's all about damp and the City of York in general. You know, I've lived in probably a dozen private rental houses in York in my time, and most of them have had damp issues that were definitely structural because of the age of terraces in York in general. But I suspect that, and I suspect the same with your house, that if we actually had it investigated, they wouldn't have structural issues. If you're saying 90% of the time that they don't, so it's all about thresholds, right? For at what point do we say that it's acceptably structural for us to count it? And seeing that on the key measures of achievement in the 5-year objectives is eradicate damp and mold from structural issues. I don't even know if that's technically possible to eliminate all those structural issues altogether. I know that I've been in all the places I've been working. I've been living. I've been trying to resolve those structural issues as much as maintain housing better. And the response of windows, heating, etc. Spend £100-200 on an army of dehumidifier robots, or all the usual things that you get told about. Most of the people who are going to be phoning through will have had 10 years of experience of dealing with this themselves, and pardon my language, but a bit of a no shit Sherlock will be the answer when they get the same response for the 20th time about an issue that, yeah, I'm well aware that that's what I need to be doing, and I'm doing it as much as I physically can in my means, and I'm wrapping him up in layers to try and keep warm, to try and keep the balance right as well, and all of that's been worked on. But so the two questions around all of that, number one is York as bad as I think it is on damp? Because it feels like it's the thing that every single person I know who lives in any houses in York continually has challenges with. Are we worse than other cities? Is that sort of Victorian terrace and more recent buildings, is that a systemic general problem that we face as a city? And therefore, is there more we can do, not just in this one area, but in general awareness around damp? And then number two, that sort of structural piece where we're presumably going for a much lower threshold of what we qualify as a structural issue. Does that then leave this big gap we're talking around on comms and on the predatory interest and the tepid responses where people go, well, I've clearly got a structural issue. It just technically, according to some bullet point somewhere, isn't. We're not liable for that, and they can't come after us for it, but we're not necessarily fulfilling the full duty of what we would like to do if we had more money and more capability. What can we do across the whole spectrum on damp?
So a couple of things came to mind. So in terms of council housing, which I guess is of particular interest to me, I would argue that the structural condition of council housing is better than the average home in the city. So council houses have had decades of investment in new roofs, in insulation. It shows up very clearly in EPC information that, council houses are better insulated than the private rented sector, than homeowner sector, which obviously has a difference. We have more capacity than a number of homeowners or private rented sector to respond to issues with things like improved ventilation. Pretty much all of our homes have double glazing. So, there's some intrinsic things within investing in council houses for decades that mean that we're in a better position. In terms of how big an issue it is across York as a whole, I guess I don't have an answer to that. I think part of the work that me and my team do is also in the private rented sector, so HMO licensing, and there are some significant cases, as you would expect, within HMOs of damp issues, both structural and other. When you have houses that were designed for a small family that are occupied by a larger number of individuals. And then the second thing that came to mind was in terms of the stock condition survey that we're undertaking. So one that will hopefully identify a number of issues before they become massively significant. So I was saying to Councillor Pavlovich earlier that the typical home with structural damp issues costs us £15,000 to £20,000 to rectify. That isn't normally the cost of rectifying the damp issue. It's got to a stage where it then needs a new kitchen, or it needs some other works, or the floorboards are rotten. So hopefully through the stock condition survey, we can pick up some things earlier. And if we can get on top of the significant structural issues, then we can be more proactive. And then the second thing that we intend to do once we're in a better place is, it's kind of obvious that if you've got a street and half the houses on the street have had structural damp issues in the last 20 years, are susceptible. So can we proactively get into those properties and look at things like damp-proof course, or things that are quite quick, quite cheap solutions before it becomes a bigger issue? But we're not quite there because we're still working through the backlog where people are experiencing issues kind of turning.
So I would contest that actually there is a clear line about what is structural. In that, it could be a leaking downpipe or a leaky roof or rising damp standing water, the water coming into the house from the outside tends to be the definition. But as Michael has said, you can get structural problems from having environmental damp. And that's maybe where that kind of grey area is. Not a geologist or a meteorologist, but I think York's water table it's quite high. I think I wouldn't be factually challenged on that one. And because it's in a slight dip, the winds that come across that clear damp air away go over us. So I think we are a damper climate than most.
So just I guess off the back of those points, we do have issues that perhaps are even worse in the private sector than they are in what we're talking about today. And maybe there's something that we can talk about as a council around how do we better tackle damp across the city and better education around that.
I'll move on. I'm going to come back to this subject. I've got more questions on it, but I'm conscious that I've left Councillor Smalley out while we went off on a good discussion there. So we'll take you up, Councillor Smalley, and we'll come back to that point.
And no worries at all. And to be fair, it probably sort of follows on. I guess in the analysis section, yeah, it will be interesting what the regulator for social housing does. And I guess it reminded me of the new Office for Local Government and what offlog are apparently about to do in terms of naming and shaming. We're sort of used to, I guess, the sort of data sets that the LGA provide. If what I understand correctly is Offlog will do that sort of on steroids. So I guess, yeah, that's sort of potentially sort of further eyes on local authorities in terms of social housing. I guess my question follows on from Councillor Rose's very last point. When as councillors, we're frequently out knocking on doors. When you do that, you sort of see the state of quite a lot of properties. Yeah, occasionally you're invited in. I think some of the worst properties I've ever sort of seen in terms of the state, and including damp and mould, are those run by social housing providers in the city. There's one managed by JHT that it's absolutely unbelievable state and condition. So I guess the question is really what currently we have a leadership role as you mentioned. Following these regulations, they'll obviously be held to them, but we also have a bit of a role to make sure they're not just following the bare minimum of the new law, but actually striving to make sure properties and homes are the best they can be. And again, given my own experience of some social housing providers in the city being fairly woeful on occasion, what's currently happening there?
Hoping Tracy will answer the second part of the question, but I guess again, so the regulator of social housing will require all RPs, housing associations, including local authorities, to submit a whole host of data every year, and that data will cover things like decent homes, category 1 health and safety hazards. So I think that not that housing associations weren't prioritising that stuff anyway, but it brings it into a sharper focus because it's there for everybody to see. The awareness of the challenge goes higher up organisations. There will be a Ofsted style inspection of every housing association within the next 5 years. Reports will be publicly available. There's no hiding place. And I think that from all the conversations I have with peers in other housing associations and other local authorities is there is more energy than ever before going into a lot of these issues. You'll find that suddenly everyone's doing stock condition surveys, and those companies that undertake that work are in more demand than they've ever been, because I think there's a growing awareness of the need to tackle some of those challenges. In terms of CYC's role,
we'll try and answer that if you want.
Perfect.
We're not a regulator of social housing, so our impact can only be as a fellow struggler with the topic material. We are part of the North Yorkshire Housing Partnership, which includes all the registered providers and all the councils within the new area of the Combined Authority. And as we work through the agendas there with that group, that is something where we can try and jointly address issues. I think if you identify particular houses where you think there is a problem, then we can escalate those up to the particular housing provider as a case in point. But I think the main change that is going to come in here is going to be through the housing regulator. I think it's going to change the game completely. I don't think we're all I don't think we quite understand exactly how big a change this is going to be for local government. The sector has not been regulated before, and it will now. We know what happened with schools when that started to be regulated. It definitely wags the dog.
Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. This is now moving on to the housing asset management plan, if I may, or are you wanting to keep with the?
Could I just come back in once and then we'll move back onto that? I just want to ask about the decent homes standard and the measurements that we're using locally, and we're doing the stock survey compared to the English housing statistics that come out from government every year, because they're different. And so I trying to understand why that is. It shows the data came out last week from the government, and it says rather than on page 34, our standard is falling, showing good direction of travel. And I think somewhere else in the document it says it's down at around 2% of dwellings failing to meet standard. The government's figures out last week say that it's 12% in York in social housing. And as you've alluded to, in the private rented sector, it's 1 in 3 houses in York that's failing to meet decent home standard. So they're different figures. So I'm trying to understand that firstly. And secondly, sort of backing up the points made about our influence further in the private rented sector, where that is the highest level of homes that are failing to meet decent homes standard. And then we'll move back, Councillor Vassy. Apologies. Thank you.
Yeah, so we use the specific government definition and guidance on what a decent home is. So it's quite a lengthy document that sets out a whole host of exacting criteria that is very specific, and if you fail to have evidence that you comply with some of those things, then it can become classed as a non-decent home. So I'd say the guidance is quite clear, and we follow it specifically and clearly. I guess the figure that you referred to, the 12% figure, is all social housing in York, and I can't honestly sit here and say that I know what JHT, Yorkshire Housing, Carbon's figures are. So I don't know if that 12% is taking account of them and their figures are much higher than ours. I don't know, or whether they're using a definition that we don't recognise. But we publish our data, as we're required to do, on an annual basis. So that figure of, I think it's 1.6% at the moment, is in the public in the public domain and is known by government. So yeah, I can't answer that question beyond that, I'm afraid.
I think that does answer the question. I appreciate it is all social housing providers. We'll move on to Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I should start by saying I recognise all the hard work that goes on here. We naturally ask questions about the areas where there are problems. It's not to indicate that there's nothing but problems. So I want to be clear. So I was looking at the business about the asset management objectives. And it says here an annual carbon saving of 1,975 tonnes of CO2 per year compared to 2022. Now that prefigures the idea that we've got the baseline data we need now, and we're happy, we know the figure, and that we know how we're going to be measuring that 1.9 thousand tonne reduction. So I just wanted to be clear that you do have that data and you are confident that we can make this measured improvement year by year.
So we have detailed information on how our homes are powered. So we know properties that have gas boilers, properties that have air source heat pumps, and others. And we have EPC information on properties. So there is a degree of assumption, obviously attached to that analysis, but it's taking the EPC information and the assumptions that come out of that in terms of energy usage, combined with what we know about how those homes are heated, and comes to that figure. So we have a baseline figure based on that, and we will know as we replace gas boilers with lower carbon solutions what the impact of that will be, and we will know how our properties are hopefully improving in terms of EPC ratings. So we'll be able to track it in that way. But in terms of a detailed heat analysis of every property, then clearly we don't have that.
Yeah, but you're reasonably confident we've got the data to be able to measure all of this. So that's good.
Yeah, we do. I mean, the level of data we have will improve. So as we get the stock condition information back, there'll be a refresh of assumptions that we made. But we have a decent baseline position. Yeah.
Thank you. If I can just follow up. On page 7, there's then reference made to effective insulation and heating. And one thing that really surprised me on that page was, if I understood it correctly, that it said that if a property's got gas or oil, then 50 millimeters of loft insulation is required. But if it's heated by electricity or solid fuel, then 200 millimeters of insulation is required. And that just felt a bit weird to me. Because CO2 emissions are CO2 emissions. Heat waste is heat waste. The source of the fuel, of the electricity and the heat, seems to me of less important than the fact that everyone needs to be getting better insulated homes. So I just wanted to make sure I'd understood that. And in that context, further down, you state on page 9 the ambition to have at least 100 millimeters of insulation in all council homes. And my question really is would it not be better to move straight to that ambition now and stop this kind of, well, if you've got coal, then you have 200. No, if you've got coal, you've got 50 millimeters, and if you've got gas, you get 200 millimeters. It just seemed a bit overcomplicated. And it seemed to be an opportunity to maybe just have the ambition to insulate all homes better. Does that make sense, or have I misunderstood it, Michael?
No, it does make sense, and I don't think you've misunderstood it. I think I'll need to take that away and come back to, because I can't recall why we came up with a different loft insulation requirement depending on fuel. And what you're saying makes sense, and that ambition that's presented below of every home having 100 mil loft insulation is my understanding of how we're working. So when properties become void, or when they're having home modernisation or significant works, then part of our job is, where we can, to check those insulation levels and to top them up at the same time. So it does feel, from memory, I can't remember why that's there. So I'll check that and come back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it just seems if you're sending people in,
yeah,
it's the cost of sending people in that's probably more than the cost of the insulation material. Might that be something, Chair, that we could have as a recommendation to support the ambition declared in the report, so that it happens sooner rather than later?
Certainly, I was just making a note of that. It's page 9 in the
It's a bottom of page 7/17, depending on how you count it.
it's under City of York additional standards. Yeah. Okay. I'll think through that as we go. I'll bring in Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, another one on the same point, and I always look at the paragraph above where it basically repeats the same thing, but it says for homes with gas or programmable heating, cavity wall insulation, or at least 50 millimeters of loft insulation, but it feels like you should probably have cavity wall and loft. So I was going to call that out separately, but since we've mentioned that in passing, the more substantive thing I wanted to ask questions about was back on the key measures of achievement. I appreciating that we're not scrutinising the 5-year strategy, but just understanding as someone who's relatively new to this, we've got some of those ambitions are 100%. Obviously mentioned damp and mold, but 100% compliance with decent home standard, etc. Some 95%, some 80%. Where were we 2 years ago when we benchmarked it? How far are we on that journey? Are we progressing towards these numbers, or any of them we're backsliding away from? What's the feeling around sort of where we're at compared to those?
Yeah, so I can take you through some of them. Can you remind me what page you're on, so I can just...
Yeah, it's page 5 of the report, or page 15 of the papers. Under the asset management objectives, it's quite early on after the vision and mission.
Yeah. So, in terms of decent homes, we've already talked about that. So we have 98.4 homes are meet the decent home standard, and that is an improving picture as mentioned previously. So I think we're down at a double figure failure 2 or 3 years ago. Properties with a valid gas safety certificate, we have 12 properties that don't have a valid gas safety certificate, so we're at 99.84, something like that. Valid electrical inspection certificate, we are way behind on that. So around half of our properties don't have a electrical safety certificate that was carried out within the last 5 years. That's a relatively new requirement, so that's not something that we're reporting to the regulator this year, but we'll be reporting next year. So previously practice was that you would do an electrical inspection when a property became void or when it was having home modernisation. Other than that, if the lights were working, the plugs were working, you didn't get too involved. So we're working towards a robust inspection regime, but we have some work to do to get to 100%. Homes with EPC rating of C or above, then yeah, we're not at 95%. We're at around about 2/3 have a C or above, the rest are D or below. Annual carbon saving compared to 22, I can't quote that figure. We've already talked about damp and mould. Repairs completed within those timescales, then those figures have come about because they're broadly benchmarked with peers. So obviously we'd love to be at 100%, but in terms of taking that point about priorities and resources, then we don't think it's realistic at the moment to aim for 100% on those. Those numbers fluctuate on a month-by-month basis, as Councillor Pavlovich will know, as he's always picking me up on them. But we are seeing an improving picture in terms of repairs completed on first visit, which I think is probably the most important one of them. When we don't fix it on the first visit, it causes the most disruption for residents. I think we're not at 92%. I think we're at low 80s on that at the moment. But again, that's an improving picture from 70s a couple of years ago. Is that enough? Is there any other specific queries on that?
Only because Andrew mentioned it earlier, the percentage of calls answered within 20 seconds, and supplementarily, percentage of calls we don't answer at all.
Yeah,
do we know where we're at on that?
Yeah, I mean, that 80% is a CYC standard that we've adopted.
Yes.
So I think that relates to all customer service activity. My personal view is that is incredibly unrealistic based on the resources we have. We are nowhere near 80%, and we won't be based on the resources we have. The figure that I think is more important personally for the customer is the average time it takes to answer phone calls, and generally we are under 4 minutes on average, which for me feels like a reasonably good service when I compare my interactions with utility companies, for example. I don't think 4 minutes is bad as an average. As Councillor Wall alluded to, there are some peaks and troughs in that, and there are some issues hiding behind that average. And then the percentage of calls abandoned, I think, is a really important one. And we are seeing improvements in terms of less customers, on average, are abandoning calls and taking alternative action, like contacting yourselves. So that's what the stats say.
Is the 4 minutes from the time you start calling, or is 4 minutes from once you spend half an hour on the phone getting through to the person? Because what the
4 minutes is from when you've been through the initial blurb and when you get told that you are on hold.
Okay.
We have done some work to reduce the blurb. So I did it myself. I called up and I received the same message 3 times and went round in a loop. So we have worked quite hard to reduce that. So hopefully it's better. If you don't think it is and you've got recommendations, then absolutely look at it. we've been told that there's certain messages that we have to have as a local authority. So there is a kind of minute's worth of messaging that I'm told is essential, but we've tried to strip out what we can and make it as streamlined as possible. But yeah, the 4 minutes is after that process from when you've said you are now waiting in the queue.
Thank you. I guess the two for me to know are that bit around calls and the improvements there and the electrical inspection certificate piece are probably worth making sure we've minuted both those specifically, because it might be something we want to come back to at some point. But thank you for that. That's useful.
Add on the 20-second target for answering the phone, came about when we first established a call centre back in 2005, and it was on the basis of almost like a switchboard of transferring the call, not actually answering it. The resource implications of answering something in 20 seconds and dealing effectively with the problem on the first point of contact are huge. And I think Michael's right. It's an entirely unrealistic expectation that for this particular call group, we're going to be able to respond within 20 seconds. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, no,
I question its value as a metric for this particular service.
as I said, I don't want to try and unpick the entirety of this 5-year strategy. It's not what the purpose of this meeting is, but I think if it's not the valid metric, we should be going back to it to remove that or fix it somehow. If it is something that we genuinely do as a council think is right, even though that's not the perception here, then we should be referring back to why are we not meeting it. So I think either way we need to come back to it at some point, but not on this meeting.
And the other point to note is that we are still working on the online repairs notification, which should take some volume. It won't remove it at all, and nor should it, but it might take some volume out of the call numbers that are coming in.
Okay, thank you. So I've got some more questions. I'll move us further down the road. A different topic, financial planning and risk. I'll do two questions, both related to spending on contractors. On page 31 in the risks of financial planning, you outline that there's a shortage of, or could be a shortage of, suitably qualified staff and contractors. And so that leads me to question how much of building services is contracted out and how much is delivered in-house. A rough understanding of that would be good for committee, and also direction of travel. Is that, are we becoming more reliant on contractors and less reliant on our own in-house staff? And then secondly, related, on page 75, we're talking about the out of hours emergency repairs service, and it's something that I guess I'd specifically point to as being something that could well be delivered by contractors, and I'm wanting to wonder, is that the case? Are we able to, is our out of hours service able to make a make-safe response to a query using our on-call team, or do we use contractors, say, more than what we did 5-10 years ago?
Okay, so in terms of what we do in-house and what we outsource to contractors, then the vast majority of repairs are undertaken in-house. Most of the, the high volume stuff is in-house. Specialist work involving things like asbestos is outsourced, as at the moment is most of the major capital expenditure. So home modernisation being the biggest example, where we have 2 procured contractors who do that work. We also, in terms of where we use contractors, if we have peaks in demand or recruitment and retention challenges, then we sometimes rely on contractors. So in the last couple of years, we've been using, for example, on gas servicing, we've got our own in-house team, but where we can't deliver all of the work that's needed around safety checks, we've been using contractors. So it changes on a month-by-month basis. Our ambition, myself and Paul Hester, the head of building services, is to become less reliant on contractors. And because we think it will deliver better value for money. I think it has the potential to deliver better service to customers. And I think it also has the potential to be helpful in terms of retention and recruitment of staff, because I'm aware that most of the, this is my perhaps prejudice, most of the more interesting work is done by contractors, and some of the kind of day-to-day, slightly more repetitive stuff is done in-house. So there could be an opportunity to recruit and retain people if they are working on some of the more interesting work that exists. So we are working on some business cases around what doing more in-house would look like. The big fly in the ointment on that, and the big challenge that we face in building services and the council faces in a number of areas, is recruitment of staff. So we are not the highest payer in the city. We're not the highest payer within social housing providers in the city. So we rely on other things to recruit and retain staff. And we have some areas of the service where it's a constant challenge to bring us up to establishment, which obviously then pushes us towards using contractors.
Thank you for that. I'll just come back on a couple of points. One specific one I'll raise. You may be aware, you are aware of the market supplement for gas heating engineers being a really sensible, in my view, way to retain those staff that we train and then we lose to the private sector. And that's been happening for a number of years, and a market supplement to pay those technicians based on their skills would go some way to retaining them, and for us to then reduce our reliance on contractors, which is obviously happening. So from a value for money perspective, I guess I'm asking if that's something that you can take into consideration. And then with regards to the out of hours and standby policy, I'm not sure when the standby policy was last reviewed and whether that would be something that the committee might be interested in understanding better in more detail at a future meeting. But if you've got an outline of the current status of the standby policy, so again, is it the case that we train staff, they leave the service, and then we call on them back as self-employed contractors to deliver our out of hours?
So in terms of out of hours, the call handling part of it is handled by Be Independent. So they take the phone calls and they determine whether it requires a out of hours response or whether it can wait till the morning and then an appointment's booked in. The majority of out of hours work is undertaken by CYC members of staff. We actually don't do that much of it. There's thankfully very few cases where we have to attend in the middle of the night to make something safe. We do have a challenge around standby, so it's not in contracts of employment of our staff that they have to go on standby. So a number of members of staff do not want to do that. So it is a ongoing challenge to make sure that we have people on standby, and where we can't find anyone, then we've been supported by a housing association, and we've also called on contractors occasionally to do that. And it's something that we are very aware of and are in conversations with HR about. similarly on the pay and grading, which I don't think I want to talk about too much detail, but I entirely agree with the thrust of what you're saying. And we are in a HR process. We have a very clear HR policy on market supplements and when you can and can't apply them. So we are assessing the not just the gas engineers, but some other roles in terms of whether they meet that criteria. And I'm hoping to have some progress on that in the coming weeks.
And on both issues, that doesn't just relate to the housing repairs teams, it has to be consistent across the council. So HR advice covers a lot of the other on standby services as well. So we can't just operate in a vacuum. We've got to be consistent with the rest of our services.
I appreciate those answers. That's really helpful. I'll bring in Councillor Waller. Apologies, Councillor Waller, you indicated some time ago.
Thank you. Just in relation to the out of hours service, and I have in the past found that there was a loop that you never got round, and I've had to cycle into town to rattle on the window at the office there in extremis, and took those issues up with Pauline Stutchfield, because it was not anything that you could have directed, but it was having a real impact on tenants in extremis to have the confidence that there was an engineer on their way, or that the message had got through. So it's really who is keeping an eye on that situation, because on Boxing Day, it's us who get the phone calls and trying to cover any gap that happens with the structures that the council has.
I haven't been involved in the conversations myself, but I'm fully aware that there has been issues with the out of hours call service in the not too distant past. And I know that Paul Hester has had a series of meetings with the Independent, both in terms of people answering the calls, but probably more significant is the correct diagnosis of an issue and the correct response. So our stats show that even though the numbers are relatively low, we respond to more out of hours evening issues than our peers. So I think there was an element of incorrect diagnosis that was costing us money. There were some occasions where stuff could have waited till another day. So there has been training undertaken with the people who answer the phones in the evening to hopefully make that a better process for our customers. But again, if you feel that hasn't been effective, then please raise it with me and Paul, and we will pick it up quickly.
I think as we're about to embark upon an Easter bank holiday season, we'll let you know on that one.
Okay, Councillor Bassey.
Thank you, Chair. My last remarks are just going to look to the big picture here. So we're just 6 years now from 2030. And I'm still seeing little indication of a credible plan to meet our carbon reduction targets. We may in the months ahead have a new government keen on making real progress in improving energy efficiency in the nation's homes. Be honest, I hope so. To deliver those ambitions, they're going to need local authorities with the ambition to show how and where the money can be spent. And we currently, as I see it, still only have a plan A, which is work hard within our means, be pragmatic and realistic, firefight and improve as we can, recognise that more needs to be done, and acknowledge we don't have the money. I want to know about the plan B. I want the ambitious costed plan that sets out how we could transform the housing stock if we had the resources. the plan that would say how we could retrofit 5,000 homes if we had the resources, how we would identify those homes, how we would identify a housing archetype, using the national figures, let's say 40,000 quid a home, 5,000 homes, 200 million pounds. How would we do it? What is the plan in place? Because my imagination is that there will soon be a new Secretary of State who wants to drive things forwards. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my intuition is that they will sit at a desk and say, right, where are the cities that actually have costed plans? I've got 5 billion to spend here in the next 12 months, 24 months, whatever they say, who can I give it to? And my fear for a number of years, and I'm not excusing any political parties, I'm not trying to make party political points. My concern is that York continues not to have those big plans on the shelf, so that when that moment happens and a government minister says, we've got 5 billion to give to the local authorities already, where's York? So my question to you is, would it be a helpful thing if this committee, if the committee agreed to it, indicated that we would like to see a plan B. We would like to see the council having an ambitious plan to identify 5,000, say, homes to be retrofitted, in the context that we all know, and you know far more than we do. If that money actually happened, if that plan existed and the government said to York, in 6 months' time, get on with it, lads, the first problem would be we don't even have the personnel to build these homes. And we've got all these strings of problems. 2030 is just 2 elections away. It's not even 2 elections away. It's not far away for all of us. And somehow I want us to be kind of stepping up and giving you as officers the belief that it's worth doing, that it's worth the candle, that all of those who are elected to represent our city are passionate, that we want to somehow meet our targets and not just carry on plodding along, doing our best, accepting our limitations. So I'd just like your thoughts on how we raise our game, essentially.
I don't think that you need to encourage us to have that belief. I think that we are very, very passionate around the carbon targets for our housing stock. Where we have lacked in the past is in having the data to be able to come up with a plan. So I think the fact that we're doing the survey work now will give us the data to be able to crunch to come up with that plan. We are also incredibly successful in getting grant funding for this kind of activity, and Michael's just drafting a report which will go to April Executive, which will set out a bit of an update on where we're at with all of the different strands of funding for that. They add up to quite a big programme of work, but not, as you say, something that's going to tip the balance towards achieving those targets. I think we would be well placed to be able to put that plan together, but until we've got an indication that that money is going to be forthcoming, it's a kind of strand of activity at the moment we don't have resource to be able to undertake at the moment. I think it's a very laudable ambition, one that we would like to work to, but it sits alongside a whole host of other priorities that we've just talked about, including building new homes and repairing existing ones. The other aspect to that is the readiness of the market. I think you'll be aware of the discussions we've had in the past about the lack of depth in the supply chain of companies capable of responding to this. Whether, Michael, you might want to talk about some of the difficulties we've had with procuring works, even for the relatively small grant funding supply we've had. And we are working actively on kind of green skills training bids to try and upskill our own staff on some of the core technical skills that are required to do this work. but also to kind of encourage apprenticeships and young people, and to set up a kind of green construction skills village, so that we are assisting the market in this region to be able to respond to those challenges. So there kind of is there is a game plan, but it's not on some dusty shelf somewhere. We are evolving it into something that means that we'll be able to seize the opportunities as and when they occur.
Just a bit of additional information to that. So as you can see in the asset management plan, it sets out a summary of our stock profile. So we have lots of traditional houses, but we also have quite a few non-traditional houses, and the non-traditional houses are the more complex ones, the ones that are harder to retrofit, more expensive to retrofit. So that the approach we've been trying to take, and completely agree that the scale isn't what we would all like it to be in terms of meeting those 2030 targets. But what we're trying to do is, when grant funding becomes available, we are trying to target different non-traditional housing stock each time, so that we've done 20 or 30 or 40 of that house type. So as and when, hopefully, and I love your optimistic view about this money that's coming our way, as and when the opportunity becomes available, we have done some of them. We know what works were needed, we know how much it cost, and we can demonstrate that we have done it, and we are available and willing and keen to roll that out to other houses that will be very similar in terms of a solution to meet their decarbonisation needs.
Just to quickly respond, and thank you for your answers. The mayoral election and the combined authority, it would seem to me, presents opportunities to identify those housing archetypes in sufficient quantity to create big schemes and to gain the attention of national government. Are you working towards that end of identifying those archetypes across the region to help in that, or are you keeping focused on York? How do you see all of that coming together?
So I guess two sides to it. So in terms of North Yorkshire, then we have good working relationships with them. I guess their challenge this year, and probably next year, and maybe the year after that, is about pulling together a series of HOAs into a cohesive working structure. So, lots of their priorities are around that at the moment, although they are clearly passionately engaged in the retrofit agenda. I think the big opportunity in the short term actually is the York and North Yorkshire Housing Partnership that Tracy referenced before. So they have a prospectus, and what all housing associations have committed to in that prospectus is that they are going to get their homes to EPC or above by 2030. So every social housing landlord with stock in North Yorkshire, I think there's about 30 organisations are part of that partnership, have signed the pledge and the prospectus, and there is a specific work stream. Well, one of the ambitions is that 2030 ambition, and there's a specific work stream about how do we collectively work together. So sharing information, there'll be consistent house types, joint procurements, sharing expertise, because there aren't, as well as contractors, there aren't enough internal retrofit project management type people that can drive forward retrofit plans for 30 different organisations within this geographical area. We've got some good working relationships with JRHT through the LEAD programme, which is about retrofit surveys. So there's stuff bubbling under, and I think you're right that there's some real opportunities through the Mayor, through the North Yorkshire Combined Authority, and through that North Yorkshire Housing Partnership.
Do you want to just talk a little bit about the Rossi project as well, because obviously the vast majority of housing in the city is privately owned, and that is going to be the hardest investment case to make. The Rossi project helps us to provide advice services But again, if we did have a change in tack from government about funding and incentives for private house owners, we would then have a route through to both to the market and to the tenants, to the occupants, to be able to give advice on that front. Just pick up on that.
Yeah, so Rossi is the ambition is to create a digital platform, retrofit one-stop shop. Any of you that are familiar or want to look up the Cozy Home Oxford or Cozy Home Oxfordshire model will see something similar. Our ambition is to create something better than that, that's more comprehensive. So regardless of your tenure, you will be able to put some fairly basic information, just your postcode and your house number, into this new digital platform, and it will direct you in different directions to seek support, advice around how you look to retrofit your property. Within that digital platform work, there's consultants looking at behavioural change. So as Tracy said, most housing stock in the city is not owned by us, isn't owned by housing associations, and there's a massive piece around behavioural change. So Sean Gibbons' team have done some great work looking at the barriers to retrofit adoption, and quite often it's not actually finances, it's lack of trust in the advice you're given, lack of brand recognition, and then another element of the ROSIT is to look at green finance. So what models might be available for the council or for others to look at different ways of empowering, supporting residents to invest in retrofit. Those of you that are knowledgeable in retrofit will know that the payback period is quite long. At the moment, there isn't a huge amount of information that if I insulate my house, that the value of that house goes up by the amount that I've spent on it. So what information is there available to try and back up that, to support people to invest, but also what accesses are available to green finance or other incentives that could work so that people take advantage of retrofit opportunities when they're doing other major stuff? Because I think that is a really big opportunity, because again, research has shown that one of the big barriers is the amount of disruption involved. So it's not just a case of installing a bit of insulation, it's thinking about air tightness, about how the air flows through your property, about ventilation, and it's a lot more disruptive than perhaps you instinctively think. And we've seen some quite significant dropouts of even grant-funded retrofit in both the private sector and council tenants, where people love the idea and then they find out the amount of disruption involved and they drop out. So it's how do we support people, provide the right information up front to encourage that sort of take up. So yeah, the Rossi project is looking to provide a really comprehensive solution. We are doing a deep retrofit of 2 council properties as part of that, funded through this. They will be made available for demonstration homes. And then there's another piece of work about community champions. So going back to the earlier conversation about peer-to-peer conversations. So there's money available to train and support community champions to spread messages within their community about the benefits and the realities of retrofit work. So it's a fantastic project we've got. I think there's only about 10 authorities that were successful in this grant funding. So Sean's team have done an amazing job. And I think it could be a really significant turning point actually for the city. I think the project is 18 months from now. So I think we could have some really powerful tool to support the adoption of retrofit in the fairly near future.
Just thank you. And I look forward to seeing what's happening in the months ahead.
Thank you for that, Michael. I will bring in Councillor Pavlovic, the Executive Member for Housing, Planning and Safer Communities. You've indicated to speak.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to
come back on the point that I disagree that we're only on Plan A. I think the stuff that Michael's outlined to you is an indication that we're very much driving the move to net zero with as many properties as we can. And this is one question, this is one challenge I'm going to throw back to you, is where do you feel the priorities should be? So, for example, on page 22 of your papers, there's a description of the different housing types that we have within the city. And they're broken down into high risk, medium risk, and low risk properties. And then on the in the reference to the paper on page 43, we're talking about 1,646 as an estimate, and the stock condition survey, which I think, you know, the fact that we have commissioned the first ever stock condition survey of every single property within the local authority area is something that will give us some of that more concrete data, so that when we're looking at putting a plan together, it's where do you focus, and what do you focus on, I suppose would be my question. Would you focus on those property typologies, those build models that are the highest risk to things like damp and mold, and focus on bringing those back into? There is a buzz, and it's not me. Well, I hope it's not me. Yeah, flatlining, yeah. Or I hope I'm not. And this is some out of body experience. Well, I was just going to say, if I was having an out of body experience, it would be slightly better than this one. And secondly, are we going to focus on bringing those most poorly performing houses up to an EPC C, or do we focus on the, if you like, easy win, B up to A or C up to A? And those, I think, are the challenges when you've got a tight financial envelope for the entirety of everything that we need to do. Is how do you focus the best bang for your buck? And my view is that we should always focus on the most vulnerable and the worst properties and bring them up to a decent standard, because that is sometimes the most expensive work that we're going to get involved in. But so I think the fact that we've got two exec members that, for example, come to every single briefing that I have with housing officers to talk about how do we move towards net zero? What do we have to do? How do we encourage retrofit within? So, for example, this morning it was, how do we encourage retrofitting within the private rented sector? You know, what do we do with the new technology and the new generations of air source heat pumps? Is that going to be a game changer? Those types of questions, I think, are very much holding us in different portfolio areas to account. So I kind of do feel that we are very much mindful of the agenda that you've raised, and are finding as many ways as we can, as quickly as we can, to deliver it. Do we need to do 5,000 homes? Just to use your analogy, as a template to put on a new Secretary of State's table, or do we say, you know, we've got 1,000 or we've got 1,500 homes that we really need to bring up to a decent standard, or an EPC C as a minimum? So I'm just throwing that back to you, and what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really useful contribution, councillor, and I mean, you're throwing it back to us. We can certainly take some time over that. If members did want to jump straight back down, councillor Pavlovic, on that, then please do so. But we can think about that, and at a future meeting, we can come back to you. Well, you're just throwing the extra work out there, aren't you? I like it. Okay. We will hold that thought in our minds, and we will address it again at a future meeting. But I think actually what you've said is really useful. Okay. I think I'm going to park all the other questions that I've got for Michael. Members will probably be pleased to hear that, but I'll catch up with you after. There are a number. I'll briefly mention them so members are aware of what the outstanding things that I'd like to pick up with you are. And staff well-being in in your area, absence levels and sickness and staff turnover. And I know this crosses over to corporate scrutiny, and it may be the case that I request that it goes there, but you did touch on benchmarking of pay, which again is another reason that adds into well-being, etc. And so that's a big piece of work that I think I'll come to you outside of this meeting. But if members did want to also understand more about that, then I can brief you again outside this meeting. We could maybe touch on it in matters arising from the minutes section at a future meeting. And so with that, I'd ask if everybody's happy on questions and comments, we'll turn to the recommendations that have been put before us, and we'll go through them, and we can add to them, as we've mentioned a couple as we've been going. So if we're on page 1 of agenda item 4, paragraph 3 is the committee is asked to note the asset management plan, its ambitions and the challenges of balancing priorities and investment opportunities. Following receipt stock condition, scrutiny asked to consider adding the investment plan to their agenda to enable discussion around investment priorities. Are we happy to do that for a future meeting? So that would fall onto our work plan. Okay, let me just check my notes because I might have wanted to add a little bit something to that. Forgive me. Yeah, in that financial investment plan, could I just make a note that I'd like to understand the areas of spend that are spent on contractors rather than in-house. And so we've got some detail for the committee on that. I'm really assured by the answers that officers gave, but I think it'd be good to get that in that agenda item. So that recommendation would add words to the effect of a breakdown of budget forecast spending on contractors. Are members happy with that? Yeah. Okay. So
I thought we were also adding in apprenticeship funding as well.
Apprenticeships?
Yes, in terms of grow your own staff. Because if you're not using contractors, it's because you're using the in-house staff that you have helped to train through the apprentice levy.
I'd be happy to add that in, Councillor Waller. So just check the word in.
General staff training as well to upskill and cross-skill staff.
So budget forecast spending on apprenticeships, contractors' apprenticeships, and Tracy, you just mentioned one at the end there.
An update on how we're focusing our training budgets on staff to cross-skill and up the skill the existing staff base.
That's really helpful. Is that okay, James? Yep. Okay, we'll turn to the second one, members, which is consider the repairs policy and to pass comments on both its content and effectiveness prior to engagement with our customers in order to inform a refresh of this document. scrutiny and asked to consider requesting the final draft is brought back before scrutiny before it's considered by executive. Now, that's something I'd really happily accept. Are all members happy to add that to a future meeting? So that'll drop onto our work plan, James.
I just have one question about that. In the past, it would have gone to the Fed to consider. It's ensuring that tenant voice is listened to in a time before it's then presented to executive.
Yeah, so the intention is to engage with residents as the next step. And then we will bring a final draft through to you alongside the feedback that we received from residents to enable you to make comment. Because there will clearly be an element of expectations or demands from customers having resource implications that will need to be balanced against other priorities.
I think we spent one evening just on fencing repairs.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Waller and Michael, for the update on that. Just to explain to members, the Fed, Councillor Waller, is the Federation of Residents Associations. So getting the tenants consulted in that regard. For clarity, okay. Number 3 is
Part of
Councillor
that
Bassett.
whole repairs thing,
yeah.
just to make sure we picked it up, we discussed at some length. It's just been made reference to the communications.
Yeah.
But we did talk at some length about peer-to-peer communication and how we could transform that. And I hope that can be included in what we're saying as our comments on. It was both to do with repair and with dealing with damp. It was how to transform the way we engage and enable others to talk to each other.
Yeah, so in that second recommendation, if we could add words to the effect that we consider peer-to-peer communications on this issue. Is that adequate? I
think if that's a flag enough for it to then be informing what officers do going forwards, then that's fine.
And I will add a specific recommendation with regard to peer-to-peer communications on damp and mold,
right.
and the law, the lawyers aspect. We'll come to that one after this next one. Okay. Third one, note the updates regarding stock condition survey work, disrepair claims. Oh, it might be a good place to put it on this one. Sorry, thinking as we go because of the disrepair claims.
Yeah.
And update damp and mold approach, scrutiny invited to provide feedback, which we have done, and make suggestions, which we have done. So one of those suggestions is to explore peer-to-peer communications to alleviate the legal the lawyers that are touting round for business on this issue. That's the point, isn't
trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you got some words to that effect, James?
Yeah.
Okay. Are members happy with that? Yeah. Okay. So that's the 3 recommendations which we've agreed. I just wanted to add a further couple as we've spoken. We talked about a piece of communications, a newsletter type piece of copy to be provided on this trading standards issue. Is that an action that officers were happy to provide? I think it was in relation to communications through councillors.
Yeah, I think it was giving you the information that we're already giving to tenants so that you're forearmed and forewarned.
That'd be good. So if we can add that as well as something we've agreed, James. And then Councillor Vassie mentioned the ambitions on page 17, along with Councillor Rose, about loft insulation. Michael's agreed to go away and look at that. So could we just make a note that the committee agrees that we're gonna deal with that issue of variance in loft insulation recommendations? And then lastly, I'd like to add a recommendation for us to be able to review the standby policy or a standby policy that may currently exist, or if there's any draft workings on it for us to be able to feed into it.
I think given that this is out with the housing department, you may need to speak to the chair of corporate scrutiny about whether or not that's a topic which can be addressed at a corporate level. So I don't think that we can do it in exclusion in housing.
I understand that point, and so could we agree a recommendation that as chair, I will do that and formally write. Notwithstanding.
You'll know what you're talking about when it's on.
I do appreciate that forewarning. We will formally write to him about the status of the standby policy. That's it from me. Okay. What I'm proposing to do now is take 10 minutes. I think, members, that's been a really good item that we've gone through. I've got to thank officers for the time and the level of engagement in the answers. And before we do the break, I'll invite Tracy, indicated there.
Yeah, sorry, we were due to be discussing the resettlement pathway report tonight. It has taken quite a lot longer to write than I anticipated, and it's going to April executive. So there's a question for the committee about whether or not you want to see that paper at the next scrutiny meeting. I think Councillor Pavlich was suggesting that we might share that with the chair and the deputy chair before the executive meeting, but that you may want an opportunity to discuss it at your next scrutiny meeting, even though that is nominally meant to be a health meeting.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, and also spoke with Councillor Pavlovic, who raised it at the last full council meeting as well. We can formally agree this in the work plan item later on in this meeting, but I think I'm happy to take views on it now and say that I'd like us to have that at the April meeting. Myself and Councillor Vassie will make ourselves available, I'm sure, to be briefed by Councillor Pavlovic prior to the document going to executive. And then I would be really happy to have it on our April meeting. And so I'll take thoughts on that now as it's been brought up. I'm seeing nods.
Yeah.
That'll do for me. Okay. And we'll formally agree that when we do work plan at the end of this meeting. Okay, with that, we'll take a 10-minute break. For members that may not have got the email a couple of hours before the meeting, there's a printout labelled Annex A, which is related to the next agenda item. In the 10 minutes for comfort break and refreshments, if you could find the time to go through that, and we'll discuss it when we come back in 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay, welcome back, members. We shall move to agenda item 5, which is task and finish review proposal, and the proposal landed with you this afternoon, although you were aware of it as a committee that it was coming to some degree. I'd like to pass over to James to introduce this from Democratic Services.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be as brief as I can, and I'll leave the substance of what you're talking about to you. But just to mention that from a Democratic Services point of view, this review proposal is one of the first ones in line with a new process that we've been trying to introduce for task and finish groups. I think the situation was that there haven't been one for quite some time, and I think there was a desire from members to start having these groups again. Really what I'm saying here is just for members to be aware of the new process that's been agreed with the chair of the chairs of all of the scrutiny committees have looked at this. So essentially the new process is that we've produced a proposal form, and what you see in Annex A is the proposal form for this one, which Councillor Mize has completed. Essentially we'll ask a lead member for a proposed task and finish group to fill in one of these forms. And I think they've been sent, to the chairs of all scrutiny committees already, but if individual members want them, please just get in touch with Democratic Services and we can pass them on to you. And then the proposal form then is to essentially establish some parameters around the potential review, aims, objectives, required resources and timescale. That completed proposal form would then be returned to the relevant democracy officer for that committee, who then puts together a covering report to go with it. And you can see the covering report for this one is in your agenda pack. And that's then submitted to the relevant scrutiny committee to consider essentially whether or not to agree to that proposal. So that's the new process that we're trying to introduce really for these going forwards. I think there'll probably be more discussion amongst perhaps amongst yourselves and amongst the chairs of scrutiny committees about how well this works, but that's kind of where we are at the moment with trying to introduce this new process to have some consistency across how these reviews are being done. Yeah, unless members have any questions on that, I'll hand it back to the chair.
Any questions on the process for James? No, that's great, James. Thank you so much. So I've put this proposal together. I'm happy to take any questions or comments on it from members, but what I'm looking for is approval. And so if anybody would like to indicate for questions or comments, that's fine. We'll skip over that and I'll go to Councillor Vassie next.
Thank you, Chair. So I feel I'm a bit torn here. I think I have to declare an interest. A member of my family is a recipient of home care commissioning from services from the City Council. You may choose to decide that excludes me from participating in this. My feeling on it is, I remember a year ago discussions about whether people with mobility problems should be allowed to participate in debates on people with mobility problems. And my own feeling on this is that whether I was involved in voting on any of this or not is a separate issue to the fact that I think I have over the past few months gained a knowledge I couldn't possibly ever have had before through seeing, I have to say, the extraordinary compassion and hard work, brilliant work done by social services teams, reablement teams, falls prevention teams and whatever. I'd very much like to contribute that to the discussion and play part of it. But I recognise that it might be complex for me to have a part in it. So I throw that to you for you to make decisions.
Councillor Vassie, I think that's, thank you for raising that. But I think because of that, it makes you a real asset to a task group on this topic. So, and it's a question for yourself, whether you feel you would be happy to join this task group. And from the chair's position, I think I take the opposite approach. I think you've got some experience. You've described that you couldn't have possibly learned so much in the last few months, and I think for the benefit of all of us, it'd be good to try in your way to share that if you felt comfortable doing that. So I'd snap your hand off and say, really welcome your participation in this task group. So if other members feel that that's not an issue, then I'd like to propose that. Yeah.
Thank you. And if it comes to the point where decisions are being made and everyone prefers me to step back and not play a part in that and just simply help inform the process, I'm happy with that too.
I think that's really good to know. And okay, any other members? We're at a merry two, and I think 3 is what's this? How's the saying go? It's the magic number. Thanks, Councillor Whitcroft. Yeah. And so I am looking for one more who would. Oh, there we are. There we are.
I think as well, as a former carer, I probably have some experience as well that I can bring.
Councillor Baxter, you are a diamond. And I totally agree. It would be brilliant to have you on the group. So I think that would conclude us there. If anybody else wants to add anything on that matter, then please do. But if not, we can agree to kick off our task group on home care commissioning with myself, Councillor Vassie and Councillor Baxter. Okay, brilliant. Next item is work plan, item number 6. So it's at page 23 in your original papers. James, do you want to? Are you wanting to run us through this? I think
I can do.
that'd be great.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So I think with what you've got ahead of you, it's for this municipal year, so it's just April and May. My understanding is that there's going to be some discussion amongst the scrutiny chairs about maybe using June as a work planning, perhaps an informal work planning meeting for the upcoming year. So what's left in is a number of TBC items, and then a public health focus meeting in April, and an adult social care focus meeting in May. I think there was a suggestion, I think partly from yourself, Chair, and officers had agreed this, about moving the pharmacies item that's listed for April to the next public health meeting. I think that was partly to do with sort of the scope of the work and officer availability. So that might be something that the committee might want to consider.
Yeah, I guess if there's any views on that, it's trying to make the agendas manageable, and so we, in consultation with officers, think that we could slip pharmacies down to the next public health meeting, and we've still got a lot to go out in April, especially considering we're going to add a homelessness resettlement pathway to that agenda, so it's going to be a big one. So let's get pharmacies out of there. If that's okay with everyone. Okay. James, did you want to carry on?
Okay. Yeah, and then just to sort of clarify something, I think the previous meeting had added autism and neurodivergent strategy as a potential item for May, and I think from discussions with ICB representatives and with officers, with council officers in public health, they were proposing potentially splitting this into two items, one which would be an ICB-led item in May, and then with a item from the council's public health team to follow in the autumn, when I think the intention was that the new council strategy would be available then. So they were proposing that split essentially to have the ICB coming to you in May, and then council officers coming in the autumn. I think that was it.
Yeah, again, thanks for that, James. It's a really big item, with some work being requested from a council perspective, public health perspective, that full council agreed at one of its motions 2 meetings ago, and the ICB already working on their autism and neurodivergence strategy separately. So we wanted to take the opportunity to get the ICB in because they're nearly ready, or they will be ready for May, but the public health team at the council won't be. So we could slip their part of it to autumn. So that's not on your papers, and that's a request from us to do that, if everybody is happy. Councillor Vassy.
My only reservation is to go back to that last meeting where we had dentists and the ICB around the table. There is an argument for saying that something we do well is to break through those silos and get people talking to each other who aren't necessarily talking to each other. So I can see the value in splitting the workload, but I'm just a little bit wary because I just wonder if we're going to miss a trick there by being able to bring people together. I'm happy to hear what other people think.
Yeah, Councillor Vassy, it's a fair point, but I think I'd expect, and I'm expecting the public health team to be in the room, but they're in May, but they won't be contributing to any of the reports that will come before you. And the work that they're undertaking in their directorate, but also as a result of the council motion, is not going to be ready till autumn. So they will be in the room.
Are you seeing us as being able to ask them questions? Are they just going to be spectating, or are they going to be? I know they're not preparing a report, so they may be reticent. So.
I'd expect them to be around the table, but we'd have to confirm that. But I would expect them to be around the table and able to answer queries and contribute to the debate. Yeah.
Okay.
Better double check with our Director of Public Health, but that is my understanding. If that's okay with everybody, it's a fair point, Councillor Vassy, so we'll follow that up. The other TBCs on the work plan, I think they can just remain as TBCs until we have got the corporate calendar agreed. But we, as James alluded to, scrutiny chairs are going to work out work plan issues for the next corporate year. And so in time for our next meeting, those will be added to a schedule. And of course, we have added a few more items to those bullet points this evening, including, through the recommendations that we made, the asset management plan 24-25 investment priorities, the repairs policy, that's it, just those two. Okay, Councillor Vassy.
Looking forward, because we've discussed investment and all of that earlier, I think we would be helping ourselves if we could, in the months we've got before that happens, looking to see if there are a couple of other local authorities we could invite in to be part of this discussion to get examples of best practice elsewhere. are mindful that we can end up just having a meeting with council officers in our own local authority all the time and not being inspired by other people. So if that period includes identifying a couple of people who can say, well, this is what we're doing, I think that might be helpful for us all.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we'll do that. We'll do that. Both, it's a June meeting of work plan where that'll be raised. So I'll bring that up there. Okay, members, is everybody happy with the work plan? We'll sign that off for now and bring back a more comprehensive one to our next meeting. I think that's taking us towards the end, which is urgent business, but I've got any other business that I will ask Councillor Wilson. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Lewis Rogers and the Navigator team. So they extended an invitation to us all to come and see the work they were doing. I went along, and I think Councillor Baxter and Councillor Rose have both attended, and Councillor Steels-Warshaw has a date to attend. It was really useful, and it was a really interesting couple of hours to see the work that they do. So I would encourage you to take them up on it. And I know that Councillor Rose passed on that they'd be really happy to do a virtual session that was easier for people to attend. So it was just to minute our thanks for that and to recommend other committee members took it up.
That's brilliant, Councillor Wilson. Thanks for raising that. Yes, and if any members want to take that up, Lewis Rogers wrote to us all at some point earlier this year. It'd be good to ensure we can engage with that work. Okay, any other business from anywhere else? Okay, that's brilliant. I want to thank everybody. And of course, thanks to our officers for your support. With that, we'll end the meeting and I'll go home to some nice tea. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.